Welcome, everyone, to the Cultivating Compassion Education series, sponsored by Compassionate Care ALS. We're very fortunate this morning to have with us Dainin Wendy Lau, who's she's an emergency medical physician. She's worked in some of the busiest hospitals in New York City, went to the medical school at Cornell University, and completed emergency medicine residency in Brooklyn. To support herself during the stress of working in the emergency department, she began practicing meditation. She became a competitive kickboxer and taught other competitors meditation and visualization techniques. During the pandemic, she moved to the Upaya Zen Center, where she worked remotely with physicians from around the world to support them through the pandemic. After living there for several years, she was ordained by Roshi Joan Halifax as a Zen priest. So welcome, Dainin Wendy. Great to have you this morning. Before we get started, please welcome our founder, Ron Hoffman. Ron, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, James. My goodness, Wendy, thank you so much for being here. And everyone that's on the call here, thank you. It's the first time I've met Wendy, though through my relationship with Roshi Joan, I've been able to see a lot of the work that Wendy has been doing over the years, just tracking her as I keep up with Roshi Joan. And actually, I just got your book, Wendy, The Inner Practice of Medicine, the other day. And as I was reading through it, what struck me in the work that you've been doing and in the essence of your book, which is geared toward physicians in the emergency room, doctors, nursing, healthcare folks. In many ways, individuals living with ALS, be it caregivers or individuals actually diagnosed, oftentimes are wearing many hats, wearing the hats of nurses, in some instances, emergency room doctors, just through all of the circumstances that you face day in and day out. Not only do sometimes the folks end up going to the emergency room, but oftentimes in their homes, it almost looks like an emergency room just through the extraordinary experiences that some of our families often find themselves in front of. So, I see your book, Wendy, as really good medicine for individuals actually living with medicine if they have time to read. So anyway, that way, Wendy, thank you again for being here. And again, everyone else, thank you. Wendy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. We were just talking right before we started with, I was just talking with Ron and James that, it's so amazing to have an organization like this and be so supportive to this community. And also that we've had so many influence that are similar. Ron was telling me that, he has had influence with the same teachers like Ram Dass and also Roshi Joan. And Roshi Joan is my primary teacher. I think she's here right now. And I wouldn't be here without her. Like Ron said, a lot of the things in the book that I've written were from Roshi, and it's just filtering it through my own experience. But all the core teachings really come from Roshi, from Cinda, who you've also had on this program, and many other teachers. So huge thanks to my teachers, and also huge thanks to Ron and James for putting this together. It's wonderful to be able to gather like this. And I have to thank all my patients and families that I've had the privilege to care for and learn from. Without them, I also wouldn't be here. So thank you so much. And thank you for being here today. So like James said, I'm an ER doc and trained in New York City. So today I'll talk a little bit about, my kind of unusual journey from being an ER doc to being a Zen priest, now mostly living in the mountains with Roshi Joan. She's down the valley from me. We're at 9,400 feet in altitude, and you can see behind me the mountains. And I ordained with Roshi a few years ago as a Zen priest. And now through this book and through this work that is inspired by Roshi, teaching more to physicians and bringing this kind of work to physicians and clinicians and caretakers who really need it, many of whom are really burnt out. So I'll go a little bit about why I wrote this book, the goals of it. And if you're not a clinician, like Ron said, it can apply to you too. And it might also apply to you because it might help you see into this world of medicine, which you might have to interact with pretty often. And at the end of the talk, I will give you a few tips that comes from a group of ER docs. I'm on a 24,000 member ER doc group on Facebook, the Miracles of Technology. And I asked them what they would like to say to a group like you. And I'll give you what they have to say. And I really want to hear back what you want to say to them too. And I promise to relay this to them. So we'll get to talk a little bit at the end. So I hope that you've had good experiences with clinicians who have supported you on your journey, and that would be wonderful. But if you've been treated, maybe not as compassionately as you want, as you wish, as you deserve, I'm really sorry. And since I've been doing this work, many people, acquaintances, friends, families have come up to me to tell me stories about situations where they've had negative experiences with modern day medical care. They tell me these stories in the hope that their stories will encourage me in my work and that my work will help make things better for them and for everyone else too. So what I'm going to say today is not at all to give excuses to my clinician colleagues who might not be able to connect, but maybe to give you an inside view of why there's a deficit in compassionate care in medicine today, and how opening these conversations in a grounded way, talking to patients and families, and really seeing what their experiences are, can help us change the system. Um, and of course, if you're a patient, a family member, I just want to say it's not your responsibility at all to educate the physicians or clinicians or to change their behaviors. But I can tell you that for me, it is really through the courageous vulnerability of patients and families that I've met that have really helped me see through my unhealthy conditioning as a physician. And that's why I'm here today. So it's really thanks to you. And maybe for those who are not clinicians, seeing the suffering of clinicians and why it is that they might not act in ways that are as compassionate as they want to be or as they should be. It could help you with your interactions with them. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here first. I went to school in New York City, and I chose the specialty of emergency medicine because it's one of those specialties where you get to meet people from all walks of life and all stages of life. And I probably wouldn't get to meet them otherwise. And I wanted to be there for people when they need me the most in life and death situations, in birth and disease, and in very important thresholds in people's lives. And I remember writing in my residency application essay that I wanted to be like the eye of the storm, be able to be calm and collected in the middle of chaos. And training in emergency medicine was very exciting. I was in Brooklyn. I was able to serve the people who really needed it. But it's definitely not for everyone. But I really love the challenge. The emergency medicine is very wide in its in its knowledge and skills, and also deep. So there's always a lot to learn as you were training, and you never know what is going to happen in that day. So as the years went by, got good at clinical training. I felt confident that I would be able to meet anything that comes through those doors in the ER with competence. But one thing I did notice was that I was actually getting more cynical. I was getting more impatient, and I was getting distance from my patients. And I noticed myself being cold and matter of fact when I was dealing with and talking to patients and their families. And even though I had already had a meditation practice for a very long time since medical school, I didn't really feel like I was becoming the person that I was aspiring to be. As I was going along in residency, I felt myself actually getting more distance from it. And that doesn't really make sense, right? You would expect that someone going through medical training would become more empathic or and more compassionate as they go along in their training and their education. But that's really not the case for me, and also not the case for many people. So in 2007, there was a pretty shocking study that came out in British Medical Journal that talked about how medical students lose their compassion as they started going through medical school. And as the years went along, the empathy, not compassion, not the way that Roshi defines it, but empathy. So they actually were studying empathy. So their empathy score was going down lower and lower as they went through their years of medical education and then through their training as well. This study has been replicated through the last 10, 15 years. There's been maybe 30 studies that's been done. And recently there's a systematic review, which is an aggregate of all these studies about empathy and medical students. And many of them show the same results of people losing their empathy as they get trained. And in fact, many medical students have a higher empathy score than the regular population when they started. And then as they went along, it became less and less. That doesn't make sense, right? You would think that as students see more and more patients, when they talk to more patients and their families, they would become more empathic. And I thought I was an outlier in my experience, but apparently I was not. So why is this important? Obviously, it's important because, empathy is a way we connect. And so objectively, physicians with more empathy actually facilitates better healing in the patient's journey, in the patient's recovery, but also physicians with less empathy tend to burn out more. So we're seeing that. You've seen that in the media a lot, that physicians are really burning out. So why is that? There are a few thoughts. There's something that some writers have named hidden curriculum. So what they call hidden curriculum is, the definition of it is, or you can call it informal curriculum in medical education, is a subtle, non-formal influence students witnessing unempathic role models, time pressure, the prioritization of biomedical knowledge, and cynicism as a coping strategy. So there's this kind of undercurrent in medical education that we're not totally aware of, that is basically indoctrinating medical students into a way of being that is unempathic. So in medical school, there's so much to learn, right? We have to learn biomedical knowledge, and that push of learning that takes away from seeing a patient as a whole is a big problem. So one quote that in this study that I was quoting earlier is that when one only focuses on the scientific aspect, learning facts by heart, instead of focusing on the human aspect and the person behind the patient, always treating everything as just another case, then one works according to standard procedures and it hinders empathy. That makes sense, right? And if you've interacted with medical doctors who are rushed, and they're really just looking at your medical issues. And I think Dr. Mikowski talked about that in her talk last time, about how we're just, it's important to bring in your story so that the clinician can connect with you as a person. And so this is why she said that, is because a lot of times we're trained to just see the medicine, just see the issues, and not see the person behind it. And of course, all of it has to do with, comes down to burnout. And we now know that actually one of the symptoms of burnout is depersonalization, of not seeing patients and people as people, and that kind of cynicism that comes along with it. So in any system, it is important to bring these informal influences to light so that we can be more intentional towards it. So that's why, that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book, Inner Practice of Medicine. Um, so back to the story and why I wrote this book, during the pandemic, I moved up here with Roshi to practice deeply. I had quit my job because I was so burnt out, and I felt like I wasn't doing what I really set out to do, why I went into medicine in the first place. So I quit my job. I wanted to take some time off to practice deeply. I was also doing chaplaincy training here at Upaya, and also preparing for ordination as a priest. And so during the pandemic, reading all of this news out there, seeing how much people were suffering, and seeing how my colleagues were suffering, following that Facebook group with all my colleagues on it, and how people were just not able to deal with the suffering that they are faced with. And so I decided to open my calendar and talk to clinicians all over the world. And I was able to talk to maybe 40, 50 clinicians in these sessions to just debrief, see what's going on, meditate together, talk about how they're working through all the suffering that they're seeing, and also talk about moral injury based on Cindy's work, which is so important. And And so through that work with talking to people, I decided that it is so important to bring this hidden curriculum to light so that we can really look at what's there and be able to change it, change medical education, and change ourselves in order to be leaders in this change, in this systemic change. So this book is based, like I said, in a lot of Roshi's teachings and Cinda's teachings and many other teachers. But without these teachings, this book wouldn't exist at all. So much gratitude to them. I tried to package these timeless teachings in a way that would speak to physicians through our language, the way we talk, and the stories that are out in the media through the pandemic, and also my own stories as a physician, and my own story of going through burnout. So the primary goal of this book is just simply to let clinicians feel seen in their suffering. We don't talk about it in medicine, and a lot of these subjects are taboo in medical education. And just to give language to our shared experience, um, so so that clinicians who are suffering from burnout has a way of talking about what's going on within themselves. So the first chapter of the book is called Primary Survey. For those of you who are clinicians, you would know what that means. It's actually a term that is used in emergency medicine. It's when a patient comes into the ER when we know nothing about them. A patient, maybe a trauma patient, we do a primary survey on them to really just see what is going on, because at that point we know nothing, right? So you want to go through systematically to see if there's something that's blocking their airway, if they're bleeding, if there's a bullet wound, if there's something that's affecting their lungs. So we call this primary survey. So in Buddhism, there's the Four Noble Truths that you might have heard of it before. The first one is there is suffering, the truth of suffering. So the first step that we need to do is to just recognize what's there, that we are suffering. So in the medicine, in the culture of medicine, many people are very stoic. You probably have noticed that by now. Um, our role models tend to be models that that to model this kind of behavior, that we're, whenever we're asked, "Are you okay?" Of course, we're fine, because in that culture, any sign of needing support can be seen as weakness. And I've noticed this when I was going through medical school. Um, when there's a difficult case and or a young patient dies, we are all in grief, but we have to immediately swallow it and move on and pretend that we're okay. I remember I was following around a emergency physician in the Bay Area. Right before I went to medical school, I was pre-med, and I had a young asthma patient come in and unexpectedly died after a code. And I remember I was shocked and I needed some time. I, of course, was, was sad and I didn't really know how to feel. But the physician at that time I was following, who was actually a friend of mine, was like, "Oh, come on, come get some snack with me." And so I just kind of like, pretended I was okay, and I was like, "Okay, let's go get some snack." And he was like, "Oh, well, if you can, have a snack after something like this happen, you'll be a good ER doc." So I kind of through training took that to heart, that you're not supposed to show if anything bad is happening, if you have emotions, you're supposed to just pretend that you're okay. So that's why the first step in the book, called Primary Survey, is really just to take stock in where we are, what we're feeling. But the good news is, I think the culture might be changing a little bit. I also opened my calendar up the last few weeks to talk to people since my book came out. And last week, I talked to an oncologist who is the director of one of the oncology fellowships in a very prestigious school on the East Coast. And he told me that one of the changes they've made is that when they're interviewing for fellows, they instead of looking for the stoic person, the person who doesn't ask for help and that everything is, okay, and that they're strong and they can push through it. Instead of looking for that, which they did before, they're looking for someone who can ask for help, which is huge, right? That is unheard of actually from before. Asking for help was seen as a sign of weakness, but now they're actually looking for people who can do that, people who has the courage to be vulnerable. So things are changing a little, and this is oncology. I'm sure they're a bit more in touch with their feelings than emergency medicine. So I have to talk to my emergency medicine colleagues and see what they think about that. But at least there are some signs of change, which I think is good. So in the second chapter of my book, I called it Reimagining Mortality and Morbidity. For those who are clinicians, you would know that the M&M conference, which is the mortality and morbidity conference, are conferences where we go over a case that didn't go as expected. It is meant to be collegial. It is meant to be a place of blame-free clinical learning from a difficult case. But in reality, that's probably not always true. I've been to M&M conferences where, there was a lot of blame, and the person who was, even though it was anonymous, people knew who it was and that it was just uncomfortable. But anyway, there's usually no talk about how we ourselves as clinicians process the loss. And in medical school and in training, I don't remember any direct teaching about how to deal with loss and how to think about death, even though we see it so much. I was a bit confused that it was never addressed. So when I first came to Upaya to Roshi's courses, there's a course called Being with Dying, where there are a group of clinicians. We just had one this year with 35 physicians and nurses and chaplains. But before there used to be like 60, 70 doctors and nurses. I came to this course when I was in 2016, I think. It was mind blowing because we were talking about our own relationship with death and loss. I've never even thought about this before this training. And how is that even possible? Because in that training, Roshi and Cinda and Tony, they talk about how if we don't deal with our own relationship with death, we don't look at it, and there's a lot of hidden fear there, it is hard for us to take care of people who are going through that journey. It is harder for us to talk to people who are going through loss. So that was quite mind blowing. And so that this chapter was all about this, gently easing clinicians who probably wouldn't normally pick up the or sign up for Being with Dying, but who also really need this teaching. And in that chapter, I talk a bit about holding grief and how clinicians and nurses, and probably caretakers too, are not able to express grief because, um, at least for physicians, again, we are taught that when a patient dies or something happens, we don't really have the right to grieve them because they're not our friends, they're not our family. So there's this term that I think I first heard from Frank Ostaseski, another one of my teachers who teach at Upaya quite a lot. It's disenfranchised grief. And I'll give you the definition. Also known as hidden grief or sorrow, refers to grief that goes unacknowledged or unvalidated by social norms. This kind of grief is often minimized or not understood by others, which makes it particularly hard to process and work through. So I think that's especially important for physicians to understand because grief is just it's a normal expression of care and love. And of course, we would experience grief if a patient dies, but we bottle it up and so are not able to work through it. And so I point this out in the book so that people can get in touch with that part of themselves that we've so often suppressed because we are told to never get close to patients so that we don't have to feel anything. But that's impossible because we're human beings. And I think a lot of physicians also would be, a lot of physicians also don't understand that grief is not just for big losses or obvious losses. There are also subtle losses, like the loss of function. For example, when a physician diagnoses a patient with a chronic illness and puts them on a medication, a lot of clinicians I talk to, it's a normal thing to do. So maybe it's something that's very common, like diabetes or seizure medication, but it's a big deal because it's also a loss of normal life, a normal way of life for the patient. And if we don't understand that, that the patient might be in grief of losing this normal way of life. It makes us less compassionate of what they're going through. So at the end of every chapter, I have contemplations and questions um, for the clinicians to look at. And one of them, the one for this chapter, for the M&M chapter, I have Frank and Roshi teaches this course called Love and Death, and they always do this this contemplation at the end. It's called the 5 Remembrances. And I've done this with young physicians, and for many of them, it's their first time contemplating life and death in this way. And if you think about it, it's very surprising that they haven't thought about this or that medical education doesn't include this. But I will read them to you right now. So, the 5 Remembrances. I am of the nature to grow old. There's no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. I am of the nature to die. There's no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There's no way to escape being separated from them. My actions are my only belongings. Again, my actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. So this is a universal truth in Buddhism, and a universal truth in human life. And I've been using this with physicians, and just letting them understand this impermanence of life and be able to feel into themselves this relationship with death and how they can bring that forward with their relationship with their patients. And so, of course, one of the main pillar in this book is Roshi's work of compassion, of bringing forth compassion in physicians and their interactions with their patients and also with their colleagues. And so we talk a lot about grace in the book. There are 2 chapters, and I think a lot of you have taken the grace course, correct? Yes. So I don't need to go through it, but I remember that as a medical student, or actually in residency, I thought that compassion was just a personality trait, that some people are just nicer and some people have it and some people just don't. And and then with that belief in my mind, when I was going through burnout, when I wasn't able to connect with my patients and feeling separate, I was starting to think that maybe I just not was just not cut out for it. Maybe it's just a failure of my character that I'm not able to be compassionate. So learning grace and knowing that it's a trainable skill was a huge uh, impetus to this book and also to my own healing. It's a big component of my own healing, because now I know that it's not a failure of my character. So great thanks for Roshi for this, for grace. And so I wanted to leave some time so that we can talk about what you want to tell my ER doc friends. But first, I want to give you what they wanted to tell you. So I posted on the ER doc Facebook group and asked them what they would want to tell you, people who are ALS patients and people who are taking care of them, and clinicians who are taking care of people diagnosed with ALS. And there are some very practical tips that I will say first. So they wanted to tell you that the current situation in the emergency department and many emergency departments is that there's a lot of overcrowding and boarding, meaning people are stuck in the ER for a very long time without a bed to go to, either upstairs or in a different hospital. The way the ER works is that we have to, when someone needs to be admitted to the hospital, we have to keep them until there's a bed that becomes available somewhere. So because of that, it's important to go to an ER that you will eventually want to end up in the hospital at. So if you have a relationship at a tertiary care hospital, it's better to go there first, even if it's a little bit farther away. They were saying that if you go to a local hospital first, it might take days nowadays for the transfer to happen. So they want to let you know that it's important to go to, of course, if you have an emergency and need to go to the local hospital because it's closer, of course, do that. But if at all possible, go to the hospital where your specialists are at first, so that you can avoid the whole transfer situation that might take a long time. So these are very practical tips first. And they also wanted to tell you that because in the ER, our primary goal is to make sure that you're okay emergently. So how you want to interact with the emergency physician, just a little tip because I've been on the other side, is that the first thing you want to tell them is why you're there and if there's an emergency. So they want to know right off the bat, before they can hear anything else, the first thing their mind is doing when they meet you is they want to make sure that you're safe. So the first thing you want to tell them is why you're in the emergency department. If there's any emergency symptoms, like if you're not able to breathe or if some kind of status have changed within your respiratory system, or if there's something else that's going on that is emergent. Then if you can be as prepared as possible, I know that most people who go to the ER are in situations where it's not expected. And even if you think you're far away from a certain procedure, respiratory support and stuff and lines and stuff like that, it's good to have that discussion with your own doctor and write out what your wishes are. Have it on paper if possible. If you want or don't want emergency intubation, if you want or don't want central lines, if you want or don't want any other kind of procedures that are more heroic, but in the ER. So those things, if you can discuss early and have everything written out, that would really help the emergency doc in the room, because they really want to do the right thing. They don't want to do things that you don't want, and they don't want it to be a kind of like hurried decision. It's hard to make a decision in those kind of circumstances. The other thing they want me to tell you is if you could have your specialists and their contact numbers written on a piece of paper, also your contact number of your health proxy, someone who can make your decisions, all of that written out, that would be very helpful. Also a list of, I know this is a lot of homework, but if you have those ready, it could be very helpful in these kind of emergency situations. So another thing that they would love is, if you have it, is a list of medications and when was the last time it was given or you've taken it. And sometimes there are situations where patients are picked up by the emergency services because the family might not be able to come. And the communication between emergency services and the family, and then them relaying it back to the ER doc, can be a little iffy. It can be lost because there's a lot of lot of things going on for the EMS folks, and so information can be lost. If your family member can't come, if they can write a clear note to the ER doc why the patient's being sent, or if they can have a phone number that we can call once you arrive at the emergency department, that would be extremely helpful. So those are the very, very, very practical things. But there's some other things that they also want you to know. They want you to know that they really care, even though sometimes they might seem hurried or impatient, because sometimes that's just the situation in the emergency department, because they might be taking care of 30 other patients who some of them might be very sick as well. But they want to know that they really care and really want to make sure that you are safe. That is their primary goal. They want to make sure that you're safe while you are in the emergency department. They want to make sure that they send you to the right place, either back home or to another hospital or to the floor upstairs. But that's their primary, the goal first. So they might seem hurried, they might seem impatient, but they really do care about your safety. That's what they want me to tell you. And especially when the ER is very, very busy, their interaction might be short, but they want you to they want you to know that they're there. But what I want to say is also that Dr. Makowski was saying how it's great to sometimes give a little story about yourself and who you are. And when I'm able to do that as an ER doc, when I'm able to connect with my patient and on that level to learn a little bit about them, those are the people that I remember. And those are the people that really help me with my own burnout. Like I feel like I'm there as a human being. So please do that if you're up for it. And they would love to hear it when they have a moment. So those are the things that they want me to tell you. And I had told them that I would ask you if there's anything you want to tell them. Remember, there are 24,000 ER docs out there, and I'm going to write them a post with all your suggestions, either something, maybe a little bit about your story, what you've learned on your journey, or maybe a few words of encouragement. And this this is recorded, so I won't take notes, so I will go back and look for these. So if there's anything you want to say, please either type it into the chat or raise your hand so that I can relay these messages back to them.
Okay, so I know some of you on here, and I also know some of you who I don't know have been to the emergency room, because I've heard stories upon stories upon stories. So I'd invite you to take the opportunity. You can keep the video off to just share a nugget or two, or write something into the chat. One of the things that I was struck by, Wendy, is the expectations that I think we can sometimes have going into the emergency room. I've heard that. And that not only are we supposed to be taken care of, but we want to be the only person being tended to on some level. And yet what I would say is, and you said this, Wendy, we go into the emergency room, we have no idea who the attending is, what he's just coming in from. Maybe he was just in a circumstance with maybe a shooting, something incredibly traumatic. And here he is leaving there and coming to you, trying to be centered, trying to be grounded. So the expectations, we need to be careful with those, and just do the best we can to bring our own empathy into the people who are tending to us. That can be really, really hard. I mean, because I have a sense of what many of us are going through, having been a caregiver. So those are my thoughts.
But again, it is your right to be respected, to receive respecting, to receive good care and compassionate care. And it's of course not your responsibility to cheer up or cheer up the physician. But just to know there are usually a lot going on, especially nowadays. Many ER docs have quit, and actually there's a huge nursing shortage. So it can feel quite hurried in the ER, any ER actually in this country nowadays.
Thank you, Wendy. I was wondering, since people are thinking, and we're getting, here's one comment that's come up on the chat, so you might want to address that. But I was also thinking that you mentioned the grace training, and as we talk about that in the context of awakening the inner healer, it
Hmm.
might be nice to just go through the basic, the principles of grace to just give people an idea of how to bring that forth in their own caring roles.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think grace goes anyway. I mean, grace can be used in any interaction, right? In As patients, as caregivers. So the just as a reminder, the grace is an acronym. Um, G of grace stands for gathering attention. And so you can imagine if you are distracted, if you're thinking about something else, you can't really be compassionate. It's really hard to even listen, right? So I remember as an ER doc, I would be thinking about the patient next door, thinking about what I need to do next. I'm just kind of barely paying attention. I know in those kind of times, I am not able to be compassionate. So the G of grace is about first gathering your attention, letting go of all the distractions, and really being here. The R of grace is recalling our intention. My intention as a physician is to bring compassionate care, no matter what. So I think Melody in the chat was saying that she hasn't experienced the ER yet, but she hopes that she would be listened to first. And yes, I totally agree. Because as an ER doc, a lot of times we forget that our intention is to provide compassionate care. We think that our intention is just to get the next thing done. So if you can imagine, as a doctor, if a doctor remembers that their intention is to um, be compassionate, then the interaction might be different. You might sit and listen first. You might slow down a little bit. So it goes all the ways too, as a caregiver, remembering that that's what you're doing is instead of just doing the next thing, that can really be a resource for us. So then the A of grace is attuning to ourselves first, and then attuning to the other person. Um, so recognizing what we're bringing to the room, like you were just saying, the ER doc can be coming from the room next door. Maybe something bad had happened. And when we are able to attune to ourselves and recognize that maybe oof, I might be so angry from the last interaction. Oof, I might be kind of annoyed that I had to do this thing, but that I don't want to do. Recognizing that first, recognizing what we're bringing in is an important way of being able to connect with the other person with no judgment, no biases. And then you attune to the other person after you've attuned to yourself. Then the C of grace is considering what would serve in this moment, not just considering what the next thing to do is, but how do we do it? What kind of quality of presence do we bring to this interaction? What kind of words would we use that would be compassionate? Um, how is our touch? We're about to touch someone. Is this like a compassionate soft touch, or are we just grabbing that person's body? All of these things are possible if we slow down and consider what would serve in that moment. And then the E of grace is engaging with the action and with the compassionate action, and then ending. remembering to give gratitude to what had just happened and ending the interaction in a way that is feels wholesome. Let's see what else is in here. I know people who are avoiding care in the ER because they're immunocompromised and mask mandates are no longer in place. Yeah, that's a really big problem, unfortunately. And people are avoiding care in the ER also because of the overcrowding I was talking about. That is a really long wait, and unfortunately, that is what is happening. And things are things are changing in small ways, and I don't know if you've heard there's a strike that just happened at Kaiser in California. A lot of clinicians are unhappy about the situation in the hospital, so hopefully things will change. But about the mask mandate, yeah, it's it's really not fair to people who have compromised immune systems. If you call 911, can you to choose the hospital to go to? Yes, actually, you can. It depends on the districting of the ambulances. But if you say that this is the hospital and it's not outside of their range, if you tell them the hospital that you normally go to and where all your hospitalists or all your specialists are, they will very likely help you get there. Unless it's outside of their range, then you'd have to, sometimes they would go out of their ways. And so that's why it's very important to let them know to not bring you to the closest local hospital, but to bring you to the hospital that is where all your physicians are. And back to Melody's question that I would like for the ER doc to be willing to listen first, if at all possible, um, to hear the patient's information, especially if they're nervous or a bit frightened. That's what I'm working on. I'm working on physicians to be more compassionate and open and not just be doing, like things mechanically. Um, Things are changing slowly. I think the newer generation is more open to this kind of work. But unfortunately, when you're in the ER, there is just remember that their first thought is to make sure you're safe. Before they know you're safe, they can't listen to anything. So just a little tip for you that that's how their brain works. They can't hear anything that's like extra in their mind extra. It's not actually extra, but in their mind extra before they know that you're safe. So please, if you want them to hear you, give them that kind of information first so that they're able to listen to you after that. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Wendy,
Anything you want to tell them that you want me to pass on? Yeah, go ahead. What did you say?
I was just going to say, please feel free to raise your hand in the reactions if you'd like to speak. And in the meantime, I was just wondering, Wendy, if you have a suggestion for a maybe an exercise or a little technique perhaps that people can use when they're in the middle of the intensity, as Ron mentioned early, of ALS, and sometimes the sense of chaos and the feeling of hypervigilance that can maybe set in with the caregiver. How can you regulate yourself and find your ground in the middle of when things are starting to seem like they're spinning out of control?
I actually think that grace is an important exercise. It sounds like it's a long. It sounds like there are many steps, but when you've actually gone through the program and have done the contemplations and the work, it can actually just take a second. I think that it can be done in both directions, both caregiver and patient. And if both people can just slow down and take a breath, gather your attention, And remembering, I think that remembering why we're here is one of the most important steps. And just even just a second of dropping in and remembering that in your body, in your heart, why you are here in this moment. That can actually draw things in and let um, all the other concerns drop away. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I think what we could do, and I think this would be okay, yes, Wendy, if
Mhm,
James, we could actually send the GRACE, GRACE, and the defining definition of each letter,
mhm.
what grace means. Even reading that, I think, can can allow us to maybe regulate and slow down, because obviously
Yeah,
everyone doesn't have the ability to take the training just to read what that G is for, you know?
yeah,
So,
totally.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, Ron. We can send that out to all the participants.
And the
And
training
Wendy,
is actually recorded and free on Upaya's website.
thank you.
Okay,
We'll
So
so
I
send
we'll
can
that
send
send
out.
you
that
I
link.
can send you that link.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Wendy. That
Yeah.
would be great. Looks
Mhm.
like we do have a question. So if you can unmute yourself there, Susan, and ask your question or make your comment.
Hi, Wendy. I
Hi.
thought that the list of what we should have on hand if we went to the ER was very useful. And I wondered, Ron, if you or someone else at Compassionate Care could send out those items that Wendy included.
Yes.
And then the other comment I have is I have a little bit of a stereotype that people become ER docs because they don't want to have sustained contact with patients.
Mm.
Also, that they're into extreme sports. So I wanted you to comment on those two stereotypes.
Yeah, actually, they're stereotypes because they're partly true. Um, and I mean, you heard from my bio that like I was a competitive kickboxer, so that was definitely that part is true for me. Um, but we're all human beings, and in my conversations with other ER docs, I find that many people, even though they say that they don't want any interaction or sustained interaction with people, after doing it for a few years, realize that that's actually been missing in their lives. And that really, when they're able to connect in the ER, even through small moments, even through, a small conversation, oh, I'm going to go dancing this weekend. Um, or I'm going to go, like my patients telling me some small story of their lives. Those are the ones that I remember. So even though maybe we don't have long-term relationship with our patients, even those small moments really help sustain me as a person. And I've looked back at people that I remember, and those connections are the ones that I hold on to. So yeah, even though those stereotypes might be partially true, we're still human and sustained by these like wonderful connections that we make, even if they're short. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And Wendy, there's one more in chat there if you'd like to.
Hmm. I would like ER doctors to show respect for the elderly and or disabled. Sometimes they treat us as children if we have difficulty speaking or moving. Thank you for that. I'm gonna I'm gonna copy these. Are you gonna copy the chat, or I can just copy it from here?
I'm happy to send you the what was in the chat too,
Oh, that
Wendy.
would be wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
I will relay this to them. And I'm very sorry if you've been disrespected in the ER in this way.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, and that would add to the list. That I'll include that in our list, Susan.
Yeah.
It's more than just forms.
Mhm.
We have a few things, and thank you for that reminder that we'll put together to actually send to you and everyone on this call if you like, but that we'll actually put it on our website as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I'll write up that list that I was referring to of things that you could write down, and then I'll send it to you afterwards. Wonderful. Thank you so much for all of these suggestions, and I will relay it to all my colleagues out there. And hopefully that would spark some kind of conversation that we can have that would open up, how people are feeling and why that they, oh yeah, and why we are the way we are, and how can we change and be better. So thank you so much. And thank you again, Ron and James, and all of you who are here. And Roshi Joan, I think, is also here. So thank you so much. I wouldn't be here without you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, Wendy, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to hear in your words, because they're so familiar to me from the teachings of Roshi Joan. And likewise, my life would have taken a different course had I not met Roshi Joan. She's one of several people who were extremely important in my world. So, Wendy, thank you. And
Thank you.
congratulations on the book. And I would, folks, highly recommend it. Wait. Okay. Inner Practice of Medicine. It's on Amazon.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
James, anything? Thank you, Wendy.
No, thank you,
Bye. Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a wonderful day. And Wendy, blessings. And we will see you soon.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.